Is the West going through a crisis of meaning?
A lot of people insist that we are. And this has become a sort of obsession of mine lately. So there's this phenomenon that the journalist Ed West called the new theists or new theism. And it's this assertion that, even if you don't believe in the divinity of Christ, or even if you don't believe in, the Jewish God, like Judeo-Christian civilization is utterly dependent upon these myths and upon this history. And if we don't recommit to it in some sense, then we'll just be batted about by the whims of postmodernism and identity politics, and we'll fill the original faiths with these surrogate faiths like political radicalism and countless other things. So there's this insistence among a growing subset of intellectuals and their followers that without the Judeo-Christian tradition, we will be adrift in a sea of meaninglessness and pointlessness. And I just I've never bought this. As somebody who hasn't been a believer for a very long time, I find it easy to find sources of meaning in my life. My friends and family are quite a powerful source of meaning. The work that I do. Um, People say, "Oh, politics is a very poor substitute for religion." That may be so, but I'm not seeking meaning in politics in the same way that they insist. I should be seeking meaning in religious faith. So yeah, it's just I think it's kind of a category error, and it's kind of insulting to assume that the people who don't believe have absolutely no like source of meaning or purpose.
Yeah, and it seems that like these new theists, or as Adam Wakeling, another Quillette writer, wrote, or he calls them political Christians, um, not only do they believe that the West as we know it wouldn't be the West without Christianity or Judeo-Christian values, which I'm sure, and I think you wrote about it, you don't deny that. You deny more that we need this idea that the new theists have, that we need religion or Judeo-Christian, Christianity to have meaning. That's the part you disagree with, right? You don't necessarily disagree that we wouldn't be where we are without Judeo-Christian values.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's also a corollary to that, which is that I don't think the new theists have a very fair appreciation of the history of Enlightenment thought and secular challenges to religion, and how those challenges are so fundamental to the liberal societies that we have today. So I'm more than happy to admit that yes, the existence of a transcendental religion, Christianity, primarily in Europe, played a major role in the development of the rule of law and in lots of our institutions. I think that's just historically obvious. But at the same time, they then turn around and say, well, secular humanism is just yet another product of Christianity. So it doesn't deserve credit as an isolated and independent variable in the development of these societies. And that to me is just sort of stacking the deck. I mean, you're basically just saying that every good thing we have, every moral advance we've made, is ultimately due to religious faith. So I'm willing to give them the nod and say yes, surely Judeo-Christian thought has had a huge influence, but they don't return the favor.
Hmm. And there's this argument too that I think Jordan Peterson makes, which is, well, even if you yourself don't identify as a Christian, you are a Christian because you've just been marinating in this Christian juice.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not the right word.
No, no. I mean, I think that's
Too close to
actually,
it.
yeah. It's that's when it becomes insulting, frankly, because I mean, Jordan Peterson says if you don't spend your time murdering and pillaging, to your heart's content, then you aren't functionally atheist. The only real atheists are, say, Nietzsche, or say the Nazis, or say anybody who holds a set of moral beliefs that Jordan Peterson finds abhorrent. Then they can suddenly be branded with the atheist label. But anybody who actually is a humanist, anyone who's a real liberal and committed to the institutions of the liberal democratic West, is by definition Christian, according to Tom Holland and Peterson and Ayan Hirsi Ali and a lot of these folks who would fall under the sort of new theist heading.
Hmm.
And
And I have
again,
to
it's
admit,
deck stacking.
and I sort of, only recently started going down that route a little bit with because I've read Dominion. People kept telling me for years, you've got to read Dominion, you've got to read Dominion. I read Dominion. I really enjoyed it. I, grew up in a very non-religious household. I didn't have any understanding of scripture or the Abrahamic religions. And, my parents aren't married, all of these things. And so for me, it did give me a better understanding of the Abrahamic religions and, the West. But I did come out of it feeling quite convinced that, wow, I guess I am a cultural Christian and I never knew it. Thanks for enlightening me, Tom Holland. But so it's been good to read your critique of that. Actually, it sort of pulled me back.
Yeah, well, good. I'm glad it had that effect. And it just, yeah, I think it would be simplistic to say it has to be either or. But I mean, when the explicit criticism of religion was so critical to Enlightenment thought, and when you consider the fact that the Enlightenment came about in a context of religious violence and persecution and authoritarianism, I mean, the 30 Years' War, I think, knocked out something like a third of Central Europe's population. Like this was 150 years of warfare. It just seems very obvious to me that the explicit resistance to all of these horrors was a really key part of how our societies have developed. And then if you look at Thomas Jefferson and the founders and what they were saying about especially Jefferson, the importance of separating church from the state, and doing so in really specific Enlightenment language. I mean, in the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, for example, Jefferson says, we're sort of powerless to resist what our reason determines is true in the world. So you can't hold somebody to account for holding views that you don't hold or holding religious beliefs that you don't hold, because it's not even their decision. You're either swayed or not swayed by these ideas and by these traditions, and this is just a very Enlightenment idea, but then I suppose Tom Holland would say, well, great, he's just a cultural Christian too. And that just seems, any argument that explains absolutely everything explains next to nothing. So yeah, I just think they're taking liberties that they shouldn't be taking historically.
Are there many liberal countries that don't have a Christian background?
No, I mean, it really is a pretty, I mean, I suppose you could certainly say Japan and South Korea are both liberal countries that yeah, and I think this is actually a decent argument against the claim that tradition is so fundamental to the institutions that we enjoy today. Because Japan was remarkably effective at just grafting liberal ideas and institutions onto existing social and cultural structures, which shows that they're really more protean than we might have assumed. So that's one of the reasons why, yeah, just the rise of East Asia was such a historical aberration. And it also came in the wake of World War II, after we dropped 2 A-bombs on Japan. I mean, it's really one of the most extraordinary historical turnarounds that you can possibly imagine.